Now, when they found that ancient Greek computer thing, what is that called?
The Antikythera Mechanism.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, that testifies to a lost navigational skill that we have not taken account of before.
Incredibly complex, and it took a long time for them to figure out what that even is.
Yeah.
What do they think that is now?
It was astonishing. We've had to rethink the history of technology completely as a result of this single object. It's such a clever, extraordinary, sophisticated machine. Completely shocking for ancient Greece.
They said it was impossible. A bronze gear with teeth pulled from a shipwreck dated to 60 BC. An analog computer that shouldn't exist for another 2 millennia.
It doesn't use digital. It uses wheels and gears. This was a device that we wouldn't see again for another 2,000 years until the 1800s.
For 120 years, historians stared at the fragments and whispered the same question. What was the other half? Now we know. And the answer is terrifying. When artificial intelligence finally reconstructed the missing front of the Antikythera Mechanism, and engineers turned the crank for the first time in 2,000 years, the device didn't just predict eclipses or track the moon. It calculated something far more profound, something that changes our entire understanding of what the ancient Greeks knew about the cosmos, something that makes you wonder, what else did they know that we've forgotten? Here's what is quite shocking. This machine was built before Jesus walked the earth, before the Roman Empire reached its height, before humanity had any business knowing what it clearly knew. Inside a wooden box no bigger than a shoebox, Greek engineers packed 69 bronze gears that could predict the position of every planet visible to the naked eye, calculate eclipse seasons decades in advance, track the Olympic Games, and display the phases of the moon with mechanical precision. It was the world's first computer, and we almost lost it forever to the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea.
Dozens of priceless artifacts were salvaged from the wreckage, including one object that defied explanation. It was the remains of a coral-encrusted wooden and bronze box that, curiously, looked like a clock.
They looked and there were gear wheels inside this bronze.
But that's not even the disturbing part. The disturbing part is what the machine reveals about knowledge itself. How much brilliance has been lost? How many times has human civilization reached heights only to collapse back into darkness? And most unsettling of all, what if the Antikythera Mechanism wasn't unique? What if it was just one survivor of an entire tradition of devices we never knew existed? The missing half held the answers, and now, thanks to AI that can read inscriptions invisible to human eyes, and engineers who refuse to accept that ancient limits were our limits, we can finally see what the Greeks saw when they looked at the heavens through bronze and mathematics. What they discovered will challenge everything you believe about the ancient world. The terror beneath the waves. The spring of 1900 began like any other for the sponge divers of Simi. Captain Dimitrios Kondos and his crew worked the Aegean Sea.
When they come across the remains of an ancient shipwreck.
What they'd discovered was the wreck of a Roman-era trading ship. And soon it was apparent that there was a lot of archaeological stuff on board.
Their heavy canvas suits and copper helmets protecting them as they descended into the blue depths hunting for profit. When a storm forced them to anchor near a small rocky island called Antikythera, they did what any pragmatic crew would do. They kept diving. Elias Stadiatis pulled on his gear and dropped into the water. 150 feet down, he settled onto the seabed. What he saw made his heart stop. Bodies, Dozens of them, twisted together in the darkness, limbs reaching out from the sand. He yanked his signal line hard and rocketed back to the surface, convinced he'd stumbled onto a mass grave. But when Condos himself descended to investigate, he surfaced with something that changed everything. A bronze arm, green with centuries of corrosion, perfectly sculpted, unmistakably ancient. These weren't bodies, they were statues, and beneath them lay a Roman shipwreck over 2,000 years old, filled with treasures beyond imagination. What followed was the world's first organized underwater excavation. For an entire year, divers pulled artifact after artifact from the wreck, while the Greek Navy coordinated the recovery. Marble statues emerged from the sand, fine glassware, ancient coins, pottery. By 1901, crates packed with astonishing cargo were being unpacked in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, each piece telling stories of wealth, trade, and a world that seemed impossibly sophisticated for its time. But among all those treasures sat one crate that everyone ignored. Inside was an unimpressive lump of corroded bronze and rotted wood, dismissed as debris, probably just part of the ship's structure. It sat untouched in storage for over a year, not worth a second glance, until May 17, 1902, when museum scholar Valerio Stais noticed something impossible peeking through the crust, a bronze gear, with teeth, precisely cut, deliberately engineered, unmistakably intentional. That single observation opened the door to one of the greatest mysteries in archaeological history. Because bronze gears don't just appear in ancient shipwrecks, they require knowledge of mathematics, metallurgy, and mechanical engineering that, according to every history book ever written, didn't exist in the ancient world, yet here it was, defying everything we thought we knew. The device had survived more than 2,000 years underwater.
At least 2,000 years old, 2,000 plus, and we know that there had to be more than one of these things.
Yes, you can't have something like that without a vast effort.
But barely. What remained was just 82 fragments, roughly one-third of the original machine. Yet even in ruins, those fragments preserved something extraordinary. 30 interlocking bronze gears, the largest spanning a little over 5 inches across, each with hundreds of teeth carefully cut by hand. And everywhere, scratched into the bronze plates, were inscriptions in ancient Greek describing functions and calculations that shouldn't be possible. The half we had and the half we didn't. Let me show you what we knew before AI changed everything. The fragments we recovered gave us the back half of the mechanism almost completely intact, and what that back half revealed was staggering. The upper dial on the rear was a spiral that wound 5 times around, marking off 235 lunar months, representing the 19-year Metonic cycle that kept Greek lunar calendars synchronized with the solar seasons. Beside it sat a smaller subdial counting 76 years, the Eclipse cycle, which tightened the long-term accuracy even further. The lower half featured another spiral with 223 lunar months, the Saros cycle, famous throughout antiquity for predicting eclipses. The Greeks knew that eclipses follow an 18-year pattern so precise you could set your calendar by it. Nested inside that dial was an even smaller one tracking 54 years, the Exeligmos, a triple Saros that corrected for the awkward remainder of 8 hours in each cycle. Another tiny dial marked out 4-year intervals for the Great Panhellenic Games. None of this is guesswork. These functions are literally inscribed in the bronze. And when researchers zoomed closer to examine the Saros spiral, the machine became even more sophisticated. Each cell that might contain an eclipse carried a compact note in ancient Greek. A letter signaled whether it was lunar or solar. A symbol meant hour, followed by a number indicating the exact time. Phrases like "of the day" or "of the night" warned whether an eclipse would be visible from Greece. Beneath each notation sat an index letter pointing to blocks of explanatory text that described additional details: the direction the shadow would come from, how much of the sun or moon would be covered, even color cues observers could expect. Imagine being an ancient Greek user, turning a crank to a specific month, watching the dial flag an upcoming eclipse, and then reading off not just the date but the type, timing, visibility, and full description. For a device from the 1st century BC, that level of practical functionality is breathtaking. The inscriptions also revealed where this device came from. In 2008, researchers analyzing the backplates identified the complete set of month names carved into the Metonic dial. They didn't match the famous Athenian calendar. Instead, they belonged to the Corinthian family of calendars used in northwestern Greece. By engraving those specific month names, the maker essentially signed the device's civic identity. So that was the back. Sophisticated, complete, readable, astounding. But the front? The front was a ghost. The gears and plates that once stood proud of the main frame were gone, lost to 2,000 years of corrosion and decay. Only fragments of the cover plates survived, and while those covers were inscribed with critical information, the actual mechanism that did the calculating had vanished. That frustration deepened when researchers finally deciphered the front cover inscriptions in 2016. These weren't poetic descriptions, they were technical specifications, exact mathematical ratios for each of the 5 known planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The inscriptions spelled out precisely how many synodic cycles equal whole numbers of years and complete revolutions through the zodiac. In engineering terms, the cover was giving us the target numbers that the missing gears absolutely had to reproduce. We weren't free to imagine any design we wanted. The surviving gears showed us what mechanical techniques the builders used. The inscriptions dictated which mathematical periods had to appear, and the physical space available inside the bronze framework set hard limits on how many wheels could fit without colliding. Any viable reconstruction had to satisfy all 3 constraints simultaneously. For decades, that seemed impossible, until artificial intelligence entered the picture and changed everything. When AI learned to read the unreadable, before engineers could rebuild gears, they needed to read the blueprints, and those blueprints were barely there, scratched into corroded bronze, fragmented across dozens of broken pieces, with entire sections missing or damaged beyond recognition. For over a century, scholars squinted at the inscriptions, arguing over every letter, every number, every ambiguous stroke. A single misread character could change the interpretation of an entire cycle. The stakes were incredibly high, and human eyes had reached their limit. That's where artificial intelligence became the breakthrough nobody expected. A system called Ithaca, created by DeepMind, was trained specifically to restore broken ancient Greek inscriptions. On its own, Ithaca could predict missing letters with about 62% accuracy. However, when historians worked alongside the AI, their accuracy jumped from roughly 25% to over 70%. That shift was transformative. The numbers carved into the Antikythera's cover plates are the precise targets the front mechanism had to hit. Before AI, Contested readings meant multiple possible reconstructions, creating a forest of uncertainty. After AI cleaned up those readings, the design space narrowed dramatically. Guesswork shrank. The path forward tightened. And suddenly, what seemed impossible started looking achievable. But reading inscriptions was just the beginning. The real challenge was taking those numbers and turning them into a working machine. That's where human engineering met AI-assisted archaeology, and that's where the lost half of the Antikythera finally began to come back to life. The reconstruction that changed everything. The decisive leap came in 2021, when a University College London team unveiled what they called their model of the cosmos. This wasn't a sketch or an animation. It was a complete architectural blueprint for the front of the mechanism, designed to obey every hard rule simultaneously. It had to fit inside the physical clearances preserved in the surviving frame. It had to reproduce the exact integer period relations carved into the inscriptions, and it had to allow multiple shafts and tubes to pass through the center without colliding. At the heart of their design sits a bundle of thin nested tubes at the center of the mechanism, which they called the central coaxial output. This was the backbone that made everything possible. Instead of trying to layer multiple pointers on top of each other, which creates visual confusion, the UCL team arranged the display in concentric rings. Each planet gets its own ring. The Moon gets the innermost ring. Then comes Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, each traveling along its own circular path. This ring arrangement wasn't just aesthetically pleasing, it was mechanically essential. By separating each planet onto its own track, the design eliminated visual confusion while also matching what the ancient user manual describes: a cosmos arranged in rings with little spheres marking each body. The surviving Greek text literally says this, and the reconstruction honors those words precisely. One of the most elegant solutions was relocating the initial drive gears for the outer planets. Earlier reconstructions placed those starter gears behind a large circular plate, creating an awkward problem that required elaborate brackets. The UCL team solved this by moving those gears to the front. A single shift that opened up space, eliminated the bracket problem, and gave each planetary gear train a clean path to the central output tubes. Part of what makes this layout so efficient is gear sharing. Instead of designing each planet from scratch with its own dedicated wheels, the team let several trains borrow key components. The true Sun shares a gear with Saturn. Mars and Jupiter share another. That kind of economy is absolutely essential when your available space is measured in tenths of an inch, and every extra axle adds thickness that might cause a jam. Between the main drive wheel and support plates, the designers packed 9 closely stacked layers of gearing into a space just over half an inch thick. Between other plates, they squeezed most of the gear work for the Sun and outer planets into a gap of barely 3/8 of an inch. This is watchmaker-level precision measured in fractions, where a single miscalculation means gears that grind and jam instead of turning smoothly. One of the most satisfying moments in the rebuild comes from solving the mystery of a small block on one of the spokes that has an unexplained hole drilled through it. The 2021 architecture revealed its purpose beautifully. The Moon's phase display on the front needs input from both the Sun and the Moon. The UCL design routes a feed from the mean Sun through a bar attached to that pierced block, creating the shortest bridge to reach the lunar mechanism. Suddenly, that mysterious block isn't a puzzle anymore. It's a bracket with a clear job, sitting exactly where it needs to be. Behind the rear plate, the surviving systems account for 35 gears. The new front design adds 34 gears to run the planetary displays. Together, that's 69 gears total, tight enough to fit within the surviving bronze frame, and specific enough that every gear's tooth count and location can be listed and verified. What makes this 2021 reconstruction credible isn't just that it looks good on paper, it's that it can be tested. In 2025, another research team ran computer simulations using the UCL design, applying small manufacturing errors to see what would happen under real-world conditions. The basic design worked, but if gear spacing was off by even small amounts, the system could jam after extended use. We're no longer dealing with legend and myth. We're dealing with practical engineering problems like friction, tolerance, and wear, problems you can measure, test, and solve. The cosmos in your hands. When you watch the reconstructed mechanism in action, the very first thing you see is Earth, represented by a tiny dome at the center. Everything revolves around it because this is a geocentric display, matching how the Greeks understood the universe. Wrapped around that central dome, a pointer shows the moon's position as it travels through the 12 zodiac signs. Beside that pointer sits a marble-sized sphere, half painted black and half painted white, that rotates to display the moon's phase. When it shows fully dark, it's a new moon. When fully bright, it's full. Around the moon, 6 slim rings are stacked one after the other, each carrying one of the wandering bodies the Greeks tracked. Mercury on its ring, then Venus, then the golden sun, then Mars glowing red, then Jupiter shining bright, and finally Saturn creeping along the outer edge. Beyond all the planets sits the wide zodiac circle, divided into its 12 constellations, and beyond that, a ring showing the 365 days of the Egyptian calendar year. Each planet is marked by a small bead fixed to its ring. The sun gets a golden bead with a ray-like pointer extending from it, exactly as the ancient inscriptions describe. Let me walk you through what it's like to actually use the device. You start by setting the date ring so the calendar aligns with the zodiac. Then you turn the handle on the side of the mechanism forward until you reach the day you're interested in. Once you've set the date, you simply read the display. The golden bead shows you where the sun stands in the zodiac. If it's crossing into Aries, spring has begun. If it's in Cancer, the summer solstice has arrived. The moon's sphere shows its phase at a glance. The moon's pointer shows where it sits among the constellations. Each planet's bead shows its position, and small markers on each ring indicate critical moments in its cycle. When Mars hits its opposition marker, it stands directly opposite the sun, rising as the sun sets, glowing brilliant red all night. When Venus reaches its greatest elongation marker, it swings farthest from the sun, shining as the evening or morning star. Then there's the dragon hand, a long serpentine pointer that doesn't carry a planet at all. It tracks the lunar nodes, the 2 points where the moon's orbit crosses the sun's path. Ancient astronomers described eclipses as a dragon swallowing the sun or moon, and this hand embodies that mythology while performing a precise function. When it slides beneath the sun's bead and enters one of the triangular windows marked on the dial, the mechanism is warning you that an eclipse season has arrived. The dial also works as a star calendar. Around the moving rings sit tiny index letters scattered along the zodiac. Each letter matches a line on rectangular panels mounted above and below the dial. These panels hold the parapegma, an ancient almanac listing seasonal sky events like the first dawn rising of Sirius or the last evening setting of the Pleiades. Farmers, sailors, and travelers relied on such markers to time planting, harvests, and voyages. The designers even added visual cues so users wouldn't get lost among 9 simultaneous readouts. The sun's bead was golden, as the inscription explicitly states. Venus carries a deep blue marker, and Mercury a turquoise one, so the 2 fast inner planets don't vanish in the sun's glare. Color and size distinctions matter when everything is moving at once, and you need to track multiple cycles simultaneously. The precision that shouldn't be possible. When researchers tested the reconstructed mechanism against actual astronomical data, they discovered something that still doesn't make sense. The gear ratios aren't approximate. They're exact within the limits of hand-cut bronze gears. Take the moon's motion. The actual synodic month, the time from one new moon to the next, is 29.53059 days. The Antikythera Mechanism's gear train produces 29.53020 days. That's an error of less than 34 seconds per month. Over the course of a year, the device would drift from reality by less than 7 minutes. For a mechanical device built with hand tools in the 1st century BC, that precision is insane. The Metonic cycle is even more impressive. The Greeks knew that 235 lunar months equal almost exactly 19 solar years, with an error of just 2 hours over the entire cycle. To discover that relationship requires centuries of careful observation, recorded systematically, analyzed mathematically. The Antikythera Mechanism doesn't just know this cycle exists, it mechanizes it, turning abstract astronomical knowledge into something you can touch and operate. But the planetary periods are where things get truly unsettling. The inscription for Venus states that 289 synodic cycles equal 462 years and 720 complete revolutions through the zodiac. Check that ratio against modern astronomical calculations, and it's correct. The inscription for Mars gives different numbers, equally precise. Same for Jupiter. Same for Saturn. These aren't rough estimates. These are the actual mathematical relationships that govern planetary motion, encoded in bronze by people who supposedly didn't have the tools to discover them. So, how did they know? The standard answer is that the Greeks inherited astronomical data from the Babylonians, who kept meticulous records for over 1,000 years. That's true, but it doesn't fully explain the Antikythera Mechanism. Knowing the numbers is one thing. Translating those numbers into gear ratios, designing epicyclic systems to reproduce irregular motion, and packing everything into a device small enough to carry is something else entirely. That requires engineering sophistication at a level we've drastically underestimated. What it means to hold the cosmos. Imagine being a wealthy Greek in the 1st century BC, and someone presents you with this device. They open a wooden box, and inside sits what looks like a complex bronze clockwork mechanism. They explain that by turning a simple crank on the side, you can see the future or revisit the past. You can watch eclipses arrive years before they happen. You can track the wandering stars across the zodiac. You can know when the Olympic Games will occur. You can see the moon wax and wane not just tonight, but on any night you choose, decades forward or backward in time. This isn't magic, they tell you. It's mathematics made physical. It's the cosmos itself, reduced to gears and pointers, compressed into something you can hold in your hands. You turn the crank, and the universe turns with you. The planets march along their paths. The moon ages and renews. The dragon hand creeps toward eclipse seasons. Everything moves in perfect synchrony because the device embodies the same mathematical laws that govern the heavens. Think about the psychological impact of that. Before this device, the sky was mysterious, controlled by gods, subject to divine whim. Eclipses were omens, planetary conjunctions were portents. But with the Antikythera mechanism in your hands, the mystery evaporates. The heavens become predictable. The gods become optional. You don't need to consult priests or wait for oracles. You just turn the crank, and the machine tells you what's coming. That's a profound shift in worldview. Once you've seen the cosmos reduced to gears, it's hard to see it as purely divine again. Maybe that's why Greek and Roman writers after the 1st century BC seem less interested in celestial omens, why astrology becomes more mathematical and less mystical, why astronomy shifts from divine revelation to technical calculation. Devices like the Antikythera mechanism changed how educated Greeks thought about the sky. The workshops we've lost. Here's what haunts me about the reconstruction. The more we understand about how this device works, the more we realize how much infrastructure it required. You don't just wake up one morning and decide to build an analog computer. You need workshops with precise tools. You need craftsmen trained in gear-cutting techniques. You need metallurgists who can cast bronze wheels without flaws. You need mathematicians who can calculate gear ratios to multiple decimal places. You need astronomers who've compiled centuries of observational data. You need wealthy patrons willing to fund the project. You need all of this working together, sustained over time. And we have almost no archaeological evidence for any of it. We don't have the workshops where these devices were made. We don't have the training manuals that taught craftsmen how to cut gear teeth. We don't have the astronomical tables they consulted. We don't have the engineering drawings they Mosite worked from. That absence tells us something crucial. Most of human achievement doesn't survive. Most workshops don't become archaeological sites. Most craft knowledge gets passed orally from master to apprentice and dies when the tradition breaks. Most devices get used until they break, then melted down for scrap. The Antikythera mechanism survived only because it was on a ship that sank in exactly the right place, deep enough to be protected from storms and shallow enough to be found by divers 2 millennia later. That's not preservation, that's luck. So when we ask how many other devices like this existed, we're really asking how much of the ancient world we've lost. And the answer appears to be most of it. We're seeing shadows and fragments trying to reconstruct an entire civilization from the tiny fraction that happened to survive. What we're building that won't survive. This brings me to an uncomfortable question. What are we creating right now that won't make it to the year 4000? Think about that date. It's as far in our future as the Antikythera mechanism is in our past. 2,000 years from now, what will archaeologists find when they dig through our ruins? They probably won't find our computers. Silicon degrades, plastics break down, hard drives corrode. Even if they found an intact smartphone, would they know what it was? Would they have the technology to read it? We've created the most sophisticated information storage systems in human history, and they're all more fragile than bronze gears. They might not find our books either. Paper acidifies and crumbles. Digital libraries require constant power. The internet needs active servers. We've made knowledge more accessible than ever, but we've also made it more dependent on continuous civilization. The Antikythera Mechanism could sit at the bottom of the ocean for 2 millennia and still be recognizable. Our technology can't last 2 decades without maintenance. We think of ourselves as so much more advanced than the ancients, and maybe we are. But advancement isn't the same as permanence. The Greeks built something that lasted 2,000 years underwater. We're building things that might not last 200 years in controlled environments. Which civilization understood durability better? The calculation that changes everything. When AI finished reconstructing the missing front, and engineers assembled the complete design, when they turned the virtual crank and watched 2,000 years of lost knowledge come back to life, they discovered something that no ancient text ever mentioned. The device wasn't just accurate for its time, it was accurate, period. The gear ratios weren't approximations that got close enough for ancient purposes. They were mathematical truth, precise within the limits of hand-cut bronze. That's what rewrites history. Not that the Greeks built a computer, though that's astounding. Not that they predicted eclipses, though that's impressive. Not even that they mechanized planetary motion, though that's profound. What rewrites history is the precision, because precision like that doesn't come from luck or accident. It comes from understanding, deep, rigorous, systematic understanding of mathematics and astronomy and engineering that we've been told didn't exist in the ancient world. The Greeks knew the moon's motion to within seconds per month. They knew planetary periods to within fractions of a day per century. They knew how to translate abstract mathematics into physical mechanisms that could operate for years. They knew things we thought were impossible for them to know, and they lost it all. That's the part that should keep you awake at night. They had this knowledge, this capability, this technology, and it vanished. Not because it was wrong, but because civilizations are fragile and knowledge is vulnerable, and sometimes the chain breaks. What the Antikythera Mechanism proves is that we've been here before. Humanity has reached for the stars, touched them, calculated their movements, and then fallen back into darkness. The question isn't whether that could happen again. History proves it can. The question is whether we're doing enough to prevent it. Are we building things that will last? Are we preserving knowledge in forms that can survive catastrophe? Are we teaching the next generation not just what we know, but why it matters to preserve it? The Antikythera Mechanism survived by accident. The knowledge that created it didn't. That's the warning carved in bronze, encrypted in gears, waiting 2,000 years at the bottom of the sea for someone to finally understand it. We've decoded the device. We've rebuilt the missing half. We've read the calculations and marveled at the precision. Now comes the hard part, learning the lesson before it's too late. The final turn of the crank. When you watch the reconstructed mechanism in action, when you see the moon's phase change and the planetary beads creep along their rings and the dragon hand mark eclipse seasons, something shifts inside you. This isn't just history. This is proof that human brilliance has always existed, that it's not a modern phenomenon, that 2,000 years ago someone looked at the night sky and thought, I can build that. I can capture the cosmos in bronze and gears and mathematics, and they did. But they also lost it, and we almost never found it again. That corroded lump sitting in a storage crate in Athens for over a year could have been thrown away, dismissed as debris, lost forever. One curious scholar noticing a gear changed everything. One AI system learning to read broken inscriptions changed everything. One team of engineers refusing to accept that the front couldn't be rebuilt changed everything. The Antikythera Mechanism is back, not physically complete, but intellectually restored, and what it calculates is nothing, less than the ambition of an entire civilization reaching for the stars with the only tools they had: bronze, mathematics, patience, genius. They didn't have computers or telescopes or satellites. They had observation, thought, and the stubborn determination to understand the heavens by building a machine that mirrored them. The calculation that broke history isn't any single prediction the device made. It's the cumulative weight of every gear ratio, every inscription, every design choice that reveals just how much the Greeks actually knew. And it's the haunting realization that if we're not careful, if we don't build things that last, if we don't preserve what matters, we could lose everything just like they did. The Greeks gave us the Antikythera Mechanism as a warning and a challenge. What are we leaving behind? What will survive us? And when future archaeologists dig through our ruins, will they find evidence of genius or just corroded fragments they can't understand? The crank is in your hands now. What are you going to build? What do you think? Could there be more devices like this waiting to be discovered? What knowledge from our own era do you think will survive 2,000 years? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if this story changed how you think about the ancient world, hit that subscribe button. Next week, what satellite imaging just revealed about the Library of Alexandria. You won't believe what they found buried under the desert.